There is a tree that grows in places where medicine never arrived. Not metaphorically, geographically. It grows in drought zones where hospitals are days away, in villages where refrigeration never existed, in regions where supply chains fail, where pharmaceuticals never reach, where survival has always depended on what grows from the ground. In those places, this tree is not considered alternative medicine. It is simply called food. And for generations, the people who rely on it have shown something modern systems still struggle to explain: lower rates of chronic disease, stronger immune resilience, and lifespans that extend far beyond what their infrastructure should allow. The tree is called Moringa. In parts of India, it is known as the drumstick tree. In East Africa, it is called the never-die tree. In agricultural research papers, it is referred to as one of the most nutrient-dense plants ever studied. But in the United States, most people have never seen it growing. They have seen it in capsules, in powders, in expensive green blends sold in minimalist packaging, but almost never as a tree you can plant, harvest, and eat daily. That distinction matters, because Moringa was never meant to be a supplement. It was meant to be a system. A tree that produces edible leaves year-round, a tree that survives extreme heat, a tree that grows in poor soil without chemical support, a tree whose leaves contain protein, calcium, iron, potassium, and compounds that modern nutritional science is still trying to isolate and replicate.
Researchers began isolating compounds inside moringa leaves that showed anti-inflammatory effects, blood sugar regulation, and cellular protection mechanisms that overlapped with pathways being studied in longevity science. Compounds that influenced oxidative stress, compounds that affected insulin sensitivity, compounds that interacted with the same cellular cleanup pathways activated during fasting. None of this was folklore. None of this was anecdotal. Peer-reviewed studies from India, Japan, Germany, and the United States began accumulating across the 2010s. The language was clinical, cautious, measured, but the direction was consistent. Regular consumption of moringa leaves correlated with improvements in inflammatory markers, stabilization of blood glucose, support for cardiovascular health, and in some laboratory models, protective effects against cellular damage associated with aging. No single plant stops aging. No single food prevents disease, but certain foods appear repeatedly in populations that age differently. Moringa is one of them. So why is a tree with this profile still largely absent from American daily diets? The answer is not a hidden conspiracy. It is something far more ordinary: infrastructure. In the United States, food systems are built around transport stability, shelf life, and large-scale agriculture. Moringa leaves are highly nutritious when fresh, but they are delicate. They lose potency after harvest. They do not ship well across continents. They do not sit in warehouses for weeks. The most effective way to consume moringa is the least industrially convenient. Pick the leaves and eat them within hours. That makes it difficult to scale through conventional grocery supply chains. There is another factor. Moringa is a tree that grows quickly and easily in warm climates. Once established, it produces leaves continuously. It requires minimal fertilizer, minimal water compared to most crops, minimal intervention. In other words, it does not generate recurring revenue once planted. You can grow it in a backyard, harvest it daily, share cuttings with neighbors, propagate it indefinitely. That makes it valuable for communities, but less attractive for systems built around repeat consumption, packaging, and distribution. So in the United States, moringa entered the market not as a staple food, but as a niche supplement, encapsulated, powdered, branded, removed from the context that made it powerful in the first place: frequency. In regions where moringa is part of daily meals, it is not taken occasionally, it is consumed continuously. A handful of leaves in soup, leaves cooked into stews, leaves dried for tea, leaves added to grains. Small amounts, every day, over decades. This is how most nutritional interventions actually work, not through intensity, but through repetition. And this is where the story of Moringa shifts from nutrition to something broader.
Because what moringa represents is not just a plant, it represents a category of knowledge that modern systems tend to overlook. Foods that function as infrastructure, not emergency medicine, not miracle cures, but quiet, daily inputs that shape long-term outcomes. In longevity research, scientists often look for complex interventions, drugs, therapies, advanced protocols. But in many of the world's longest living regions, the pattern looks different. Consistent movement, strong social networks, moderate caloric intake, and certain plants consumed daily for generations. Moringa appears repeatedly in these environments.
Not because it is exotic, because it is available, because it grows near homes, because it survives or other crops fail, because it can be harvested without destroying the plant, because it regenerates quickly. It is food designed for continuity. In recent years, interest in moringa has grown in the United States. Small farms in Florida, Texas, and Southern California have begun cultivating it. Researchers continue studying its compounds. Health communities discuss it. Gardeners experiment with it. But for most Americans, it remains abstract. Something you might see in a smoothie blend, something recommended in a wellness article, something distant. Yet the tree itself is not distant. In USDA zones 9 through 11, moringa grows outdoors year-round. In colder climates, it grows in containers and can be brought indoors during winter. It reaches harvestable size within months. Leaves can be cut repeatedly without killing the plant. One tree can produce more edible biomass in a season than many traditional garden crops. Which leads to a simple question. What happens when a food moves from being a product you buy to a system you grow? That shift changes more than nutrition. It changes dependency. It changes resilience. It changes the relationship between consumption and control. For most of human history, critical foods were not purchased. They were cultivated near where people lived. Modern systems brought convenience, scale, and reliability. But they also created distance between individuals and the sources of their daily inputs. Moringa sits at the intersection of those two realities. It exists within global agriculture. It is sold in modern markets. It is studied in laboratories. But it also exists outside them, as a tree that can grow in a yard, on a balcony, in a community garden, in places where access to fresh, nutrient-dense food is limited. No single plant transforms health. No leaf replaces medical care. No tree eliminates the need for modern systems. But some plants offer something quieter, baseline support, a daily input that accumulates over years, a nutritional foundation that requires no subscription, no supply chain, no ongoing purchase once established. This is not about rejecting modern medicine. It is about understanding that long-term health has always depended on multiple layers of support. Emergency care when needed, preventive care when possible, and daily nourishment that operates below the level of crisis. In the regions where moringa has been eaten for centuries, no one calls it a miracle. They call it lunch. And that may be the most important detail of all, because the most powerful health interventions in human history have rarely looked dramatic in the moment. They look ordinary, repetitive, almost invisible, until you measure their effects across decades. The tree is not hidden, the research is not secret, the seeds are not restricted. But knowledge does not spread automatically. It spreads when people notice patterns, when they look at what has worked elsewhere, when they decide which elements of modern life are worth keeping and which older systems are worth restoring. Moringa has been part of that older system for thousands of years. The question is not whether it works as a miracle. The question is whether daily, unremarkable inputs might matter more than occasional dramatic ones. If a tree can produce nutrient-dense leaves continuously, if it can grow in harsh conditions, if it has supported human diets for centuries, then its value is not in hype. Its value is in consistency. And consistency is something modern health systems rarely provide on their own. They intervene when something breaks. They treat when something fails. But they do not grow in your backyard. Moringa can. And that changes the equation. Because once a system can be grown locally, harvested daily,
and sustained without constant purchasing, it stops being a product. It becomes infrastructure, the kind that operates quietly, the kind that accumulates effects slowly, the kind that rarely goes viral, but the kind that over time shapes outcomes more than most people realize. The tree is already known in much of the world. The science is still catching up to what routine consumption has shown for generations. The only question left is whether knowledge that grows easily will spread as easily, or whether, like many resilient systems, it will continue to exist mostly in the background until more people decide to plant it. Forbidden Harvest documents plants like this, not as miracles, not as replacements for medicine, but as systems that once formed the foundation of daily life and may still have a role to play. The seeds exist, the research exists, the tree grows quickly. What happens next depends entirely on who decides to grow it.